Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the now fifth episode of the Barshow with myself, Dean Callan, and my co-host, Carina Soto Velasquez.
You said it well this time.
Even despite my sudden
Hello, everybody.
echo. Yeah, hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today, I'm really excited about today. Carina, do you want to introduce our guest today?
Yes. So today we have a guest called Leo Robitschek. Is a dear friend and also a fantastic bartender. And for this episode, when Monica contacted me and wanted to talk about flavor, for me was the first person that came to my head, and I'm glad that he can join us today.
Yeah, he's. I'm very excited. He was originally going to come and sit between us.
Yes, I
Which
know.
I was super excited about getting Leo in the cabin. If for anyone that doesn't already know, he's just a total Titan powerhouse. I described him earlier as like a bartender demigod. He's the first person I've ever seen. When I first met him, I was like, oh, that guy. Okay, wow, he's impressive. So yeah, finally we can bring him in.
Yeah.
We can bring him in.
Hello.
Hi everyone.
Hey.
I'm
How
so
you
sorry I
doing?
couldn't be there. I've been trying to go to Dean's cabin for quite a long time now, but things keep happening.
Well, next time you're in London, the invite is always open. You can come down and check it out.
Perfect.
So first of all, when I said the first person I thought about was you when we talked about flavor, is because since I've met you and since I know you working at 11 Madison Park at the time and then opening the Nomad in New York, all your cocktail programs and absolutely all the bartenders that work with you as well, um, your menus and the structure of it, the creativity behind, but also keeping a beautiful balance, structure, work of ingredients is always. I think you are somebody that has always prioritized flavor in doing something really delicious, no matter what. You don't compromise, and I have always admired that. And I think even very simple drinks that sometimes you can read in a menu today at Side Hustle, for example, you can read 3-4 ingredients, but there's always going to be something surprising and explosive, and that is for me why I wanted you here, because I wanted you to tell us a little bit more of your background, because you had the chance to work with also Michelin star chefs. You in a city like New York. I know you a little personally, so I know the type of food you enjoy and your palate, and you are very knowledgeable about wine and about other spirits, not just with a classic bartender curriculum. So if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you basically work with flavor.
Sure. Well, it's a lot. Thank you. That is the kindest introduction I've ever gotten from anybody, from both of you. Um, yeah. So I guess my road to bartending is a little different, but I think most of ours are. I don't know of anyone of our generation that grew up saying, I want to be a bartender. Um, but I was born in Caracas, in Venezuela. And I guess my love for food and my love for flavors started with my grandmother. I had a very strict childhood in that I was ADHD and had a lot of energy. So I had a very strict diet. I was not allowed to have any sugar. And my grandmother, who sadly passed away when I was 8, but like she would always sneak me out and I'd take a walk down the hill with her. And without my mom knowing, she'd always buy me, I think, a passion fruit juice that was fresh squeezed, and then something that we have called cachitos, which can be savory or sweet. And they're sort of like our version of croissant, but they're not laminated. And of course, I would always pick a sweet one, the one that had like guava or something in it. And I just like love those flavors. And for me, it was always a treat. But for me, what it did, it always created this moment of like love and nostalgia that I had for my grandmother that I always tried to reproduce whenever I create anything. From that, I was always enamored by food, as you can probably see. Uh, I've always loved going out to dinner because it was the one time that I was allowed to be free. I felt like an adult, and I was allowed to order anything I wanted off the menu. So where at home, I had such strict, like, you eat what we give you and that's it. When I was in this restaurant, I felt like such a grown up and I could order anything I wanted. And I just loved ordering the weirdest things on the menu, anything I'd never seen. And this is from the age of like 2 or 3. I'd be like, I want whatever that person's having. And by the time I could read, I was like, what is this? I don't know that word. I want it. And the only rule was that I had to eat all of it. And I just sort of fell in love with food.
That's a
I didn't
so
really start bartending seriously. I mean, I bartended in college, but in a really bad way. I just sort of asked what color it was and made whatever drink it was. But when I moved to New York, I sort of left my initial job and went back to school, and I started bartending around the city. And the first place that I got a bartending job was Sushi Samba. And at that point, there was a gentleman by the name of Tad Carducci of Tippling Brothers. He was running the programs, and he made us take these like mandatory sake, beer, wine, cocktail classes. And I fell in love with these different flavors that I was getting out of these products that I had never really had. Like my intro to sake was non-existent. And with that, I was like, what are these weird flavors that I've never tasted? And from that, it took me on to a few places, and I ended up at 11 Madison Park, where I just started running the cocktail program because nobody was doing it. And at that point, it was like 2005. There wasn't a lot of resources out there for us. There wasn't this amazing podcast or this amazing academy. The books that we had were very limited. And I just remember picking up any book that I could and sort of reading it. And we were a little slower at the time. 11 Madison Park wasn't the 11 Madison Park that it is today, or that it was when I was there. It was a 0 Michelin star sort of bistro in this beautiful setting. And we were busy, but nobody ever really ordered cocktails. So what I would just do is I would open this book and I would just make whatever cocktail each day was one of these classics. And I realized that I didn't really like any of these classics. And this was in a time in New York City where, Milk and Honey was king, and Sasha was doing an amazing thing, creating all of these amazing programs that were so true to tradition. And, you had the Flatiron and Pegu Club that were all sort of Dale DeGroff sort of alumni. And there wasn't anything that was sort of crazy or innovative. Everything was just super classic. And while I loved that, I just was like, well, I don't know if this is what I want to drink. So for me, my generation, I'm sorry, my venture into flavor started from multiple places, from my love of food, from memory nostalgia, but also from my own insecurities, and then from never wanting to sort of fit within the box or go with the grain. I've always been a person that has marched to the beat of my own drum. Even from when I was a young kid, I was always a little bit weird, and I always wanted to try something different. I've always been curious. The other thing that happened is, we had an amazing wine program, and I started really getting into wine. And from there is where I think I started learning all of the vocabulary of flavor. But obviously, that's very limited in terms of when it comes to cocktail or food. Everything else I sort of learned came from working with these amazing 3 Michelin star chefs and learning more about the things that you don't get in cocktails. The balance between, well, now you sort of do, but back then you didn't. The balance between texture, fat, acid, and salt. That's something that you weren't really seeing in cocktails. So that's how I started viewing cocktails. I also didn't have a mentor. I didn't grow up in one of these amazing bar schools like the Sasha Petrosky School or the Julie Reiner or the Dale DeGroff. I sort of, like I said, marched to a beat of my own drum, which made me a little insecure. I just would question absolutely every single thing that I did and say, could I do this better? And I guess the third thing that happened is I said that we weren't the same restaurant. We were actually, most people don't know this, but 11 Madison Park was doing so horribly at one point that we only had about 2 months worth of money to pay rent. We were about to close. And I couldn't buy any new products. But what I did is I inherited this amazing liquor room of all of the past somms that would run it that just had a whole bunch of weird things. So I had the craziest collection of sherry. I had a big collection of chartreuse randomly. And then I had all of these grappas and marks and calvadoses and armagnacs. And at that point, you weren't really seeing a lot of cocktails in 2005, 6, 7 made with those products. So I had to learn to use them, not because I was super interested in it, but because I couldn't buy anything unless I went through these products. So I started making all these. Sorry, go ahead.
I just said amazing. Like your understanding of flavor from what I'm hearing has developed because you were constantly kind of pivoting. It's like I've got this, I've got to use it, I've got to figure out how to use it. And by the sounds of it, sherry and chartreuse and sake and
Yeah.
things with really deep flavors that are kind of foreign to the Western palate, who are people who are used to drinking, you know, I guess, what cosmopolitans, vodka, mojitos,
Yeah.
and classics with whiskey. That would have been loads of fun to be able to play with that. But it feels like you were a little ahead of your time playing with flavors that are deeper and more challenging, that take a bit of getting to know, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And if I'm going to be super honest, I was so bitter about it. Like every time I'd have to but it was really because my insecurities, because I couldn't open a book and find a cocktail that was full of like, you know, Calvados cocktails or sherry cocktails or vermouth cocktails. There was always maybe like one or two. So I just sort of had to learn to use it and make crowd pleasing cocktails. The other thing is, I always was really lucky that I had this amazing group of chefs, especially in our pastry department, that were as excited, if not more excited, to help me create flavors.
Yeah,
You know, for 11 Madison Park and then Nomad for over 15 years. And it was always so collaborative. Like I sat in every single tasting for the kitchen, and we always had a sous chef come and support us that would sit in tastings for the bar. And it's not even that they would dictate or I would dictate, but what it did is it allowed us to get inspired by each other. And it allowed us to work with each other to bring out flavors that aren't sort of normal in both settings, that aren't normal in the food world or aren't normal in the cocktail world. So, you know, I guess I've been making very kitchen-centric, fresh produce, heavy, more savory cocktails since about 2006 or 7 when it wasn't quite popular.
nice.
But at that time, I was lucky that my audience was people that were coming into 11 Madison Park that wanted to have an experience that they've never had. They were coming into a 3 Michelin star restaurant, so they were open to trying absolutely anything. If that would have happened to me and we only had a Nomad, you know, we probably would have failed miserably because people would have been like, "That's not what I want." So yeah, for me, it's a lot of hard work, a lot of luck, being put in a lot of boxes that I didn't want to fit in, and sort of my own insecurities that allowed me to create sort of the palette and the flavors that we currently do. And I guess to me, that's always sort of evolving. I always get bored of doing the same thing, so I just, you know, I get inspired by my life, by nostalgia, by things of my past, and by things that I taste.
So, Leo, I'm going to interject real quickly. Were you about to ask a question?
Well, yeah, but you go, let me see.
Normally, we start with a trailer from Perspectives that discusses flavor in this particular instance, and it takes about a minute, and then we discuss our take on Perspectives. Do you want to do that?
Oh, sure. I only said oh because I thought you said normally we do, but I thought you were gonna add something very deep.
Well, normally we do, but like I don't want to say we have to because I don't ever want to cut you off. I could sit and listen to you all day long. It's just that we want you to be able to also leave at some point and go home and go about your very busy schedule. So I thought I'd play the video.
Embarrass me, which you do such a good job at.
Rock and roll.
That's why I love you.
There is a real lack of understanding about what the difference between taste and flavour is.
75 to 95% of what we think we taste, we're actually smelling.
If you learn about flavour, it's like learning a language.
就像在另外一个不同的世界一样。
상큼하다, 시큼하다, 시다, all meaning like sour, but a little bit different type of sour taste.
If I had to give up one sense, it would be my taste. Shouldn't be this much fun.
All right, we're back. So that was the trailer for. There's actually a couple of different episodes on flavor, and they're really interesting. I was saying to Hudson, who's our button pressy guy today, that it's been so long since I learned the mint trick. You know, like you close your nose and put a piece of mint on your mouth, and you chew it, and then you let go, and suddenly the flavor comes to you. I was doing that for guests in 2002, 2003 when they were like, I don't want all this mint on my mojito. And I'd be like, oh, you kind of need the aroma. You know, it's you need the aroma. It works better, and then they understand the moment you see that eyes open after they
And
take their fingers
spices
off.
too. You know, there's so many spices when if you don't smell, you will not taste or
Yeah.
they really work together. Leo, how will you define your cocktail construction? Like, how do you have like a specific style? Would you say, I have one way to go and this is like the rules of it, or is just all around the place? I mean, we talked like you explained us how you started and how flavor came to your life basically. But today, with the amount of things you do, with the multiple cocktail programs, even like Nomad London has different cocktail programs everywhere, and like how you will define and you organize that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess my definition of cocktail construction is that there is no right or wrong to cocktail construction. For me, I'm such a stickler at knowing the basics and understanding why. Every time we train, we teach people why we do things, not how. Because I think when you get people to think analytically, they correct their own mistakes. So whenever they're doing something, they learn. So, I said I read all of these classic books, but I didn't really like a lot of the classics, but I still learned the building blocks of the classics. And I think I wasn't really able to create cocktails or manipulate it until I really learned it. And I think that's what we do when we start. Anytime we start a new program, we train all of our bartenders on 100 classics, and then we train them on the original spec, and then we train them on our spec. After that, we sort of let the original spec go by. It's just so they can see the differences in the way that we construct flavor and the way that we construct texture and balance. But I also want them to know those cocktails because there are some people that do have palates that might be a little bit boozier, or stronger, or drier, or people that want to have the most classic version of that cocktail. And I want them to be able to provide that if they want. But then from that, it's sort of not that every rule's out the window because it doesn't really exist for us either. It's sort of know why you're making the changes and understand the changes that you're making, how that's affecting the cocktail and what you need to do in order to balance it.
Yeah,
Right?
that's a really strong way of thinking. I used to always say that you have to learn all the basics, you have to learn all the classics because you can't consistently think outside the box unless you know what's in the box in the first place. You know what I mean?
Build a car and you know how to build an engine, right? Like, or you can't build a car unless you understand electricity and motors and all of those things. You can't just say one day I want to like create a cocktail when you have no clue what any of the ingredients that you're putting in a cocktail do.
One of the things that strikes me, the drinks in all of the venues that I've been to that you're curating the drinks in, not only are the flavors amazing, but the mouth feels always on point, and there's a range. There'll be cocktails that are light and have a less aggressive, less boozy palate, and then or mouthfeel, I guess. And then there's cocktails that, with as much flavor, are heavier and boozier. Do you, when you're putting a list together, look at not only the range of flavors, but a range of different textures and ABVs in there,
Yeah,
or is it all?
Ever since the first day, the way that the EMP menu, which is 11 Madison Park, was set up, it was aperitif, then it was light and dark. And light didn't mean that it always had spirits that were in age. Light sort of meant that it gave a feeling that these spirits were in age, or that it felt that dark sort of gave a sense that it was like aged spirits, and aperitif was always more low ABV. And with that, we also had non-alcoholic. So yeah, I guess whenever I created my menus, it always had to revolve around food. It always had to revolve around that experience. So while it wasn't necessarily pushed towards it only, because we had the bar that was very busy, but it gave people the opportunity to have something that was more aperitif-y, more digestif-y, or something that was mid-range that they could just drink with dinner around a night out. So we do look at ABV quite a bit. We, especially when we do our martini variations, we do a lot of them, diluted and bottled, because we also play a lot with dilution. But in order to do that, you need to understand what the perception is from a texture perspective on ABV when it comes to a martini. I think a lot of us will taste a martini and know if it's over dilute or under dilute, meaning like, does it taste too watery or does it taste too strong?
Yeah, it's the first
Yeah.
thing. The first thing I'll notice about a martini or a Manhattan, even sometimes a Negroni, like it's that it hits your mouth and you're like, oh, I think the
And a
ABV's
lot of
off. Or
about it is because of mouthfeel and flavor. When something has a thicker, richer mouthfeel, it could have more intense flavor, or it could even have higher sugar content than when it's thin. You could have a cocktail is the same exact ingredients, but one of them has more viscosity to the palate, and with that, you accept more sugar than if it were sort of thin. So with as we do that, a lot of we use a lot of wine-based products. So we use a lot of sherry, a lot of vermouth in our cocktails. And again, that sort of stemmed from me having to use them when I was a younger bartender. But then there's a layer of complexity that it adds to these flavors that you sort of miss when you don't use them. You're like, God, I wish there was like more nuttiness, or I wish that this was lengthened a bit, or I wish that there was more like an oxidative note in this. And with that, when you do that, a lot of times when you stir that cocktail the same as you would a martini that's, a drier martini, it's going to taste a lot more dilute because that ABV is a lot lower, even if you're getting the same amount of water. So we play a lot with dilution. We started doing this in Nomad, New York. We're like, hey, one of the main ingredients to a cocktail is water, and that water comes from stirring or shaking. So instead of that, we started playing by incorporating our own dilutant and putting it in the freezer. So the first drink that we did that with, we diluted it with coconut water. And obviously that adds other flavors, but it also adds a lot of texture. And we started doing that to sort of Manhattan or old-fashioned variations. And it really, really changes that palate and that mouthfeel. And it makes the drink completely different. Yeah.
And that's
I
so. I
forgot
mean,
what you
I every time I have a question, he's already answered it. It's just because I know a lot of your classics. I'm a big fan of Walter Gibson. So if nobody has ever tasted the Walter Gibson, please go to Side Hustle and Nomad. It's incredible cocktail. And I would say the first thing that strikes me when I have the drink more than the flavor itself is the texture.
Yeah.
And I can see that even in all the other drinks you have over there and how you work them, there is always this like one thing that you're how he managed this. Like you ask yourself these questions, and I admire that a lot. I love it. If you had an advice for bartenders today on how to create their drinks or how to work with flavor in a more Leo Robitschek way, what would that be?
It's funny because my advice is going to be counterintuitive. I say I don't fit within any box, but my advice is to like really invest time and learn all of the building blocks and all the classics. It's not only on the structure of cocktails, it's also on the spirits that you use. I think there's the Picasso quote that says, actually, I forget what it is. Well, there you go. My mind's gone. But it essentially means like, learn all the rules so then you can break them. And I think it's really important when making cocktails in order to do that. Like you need to learn what spirits are. You need to learn how they work in cocktails. Alex Day and Death & Co. they weren't the ones that started this, but they used to talk about this a lot in cocktail classes, which is the Mr. Potato Head version of building cocktails. Everyone knows what Mr. Potato Head is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a
Toy
toy that
Story.
as a kid had different slots, and there was ears, eyes, nose, mouth, and you would look at it as if each one was a different ingredient. So like the mouth was spirit, the nose was sugar, the eyes were citrus, the ears were bitter. But then there's certain things that you would put on and would fit multiple holes. Like when you would put on a Darth Vader mask, it'd cover, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And that's something like sherry or champagne because it adds alcohol, it adds acidity, and adds bitterness. So when you modify that, you need to learn to modify the other things around it in order to make that cocktail balance. So I think once you learn those building blocks, then don't be constrained by all of the things that you've learned. So then I would say start experimenting. But when you do, start experimenting with one ingredient at a time. So if you want to use one ingredient, change it, see how that changes the cocktail, and then modify from there on out. And then the other thing is texture and aroma are massive. So one thing that we do a lot, you talk about the Walter Gibson. That was probably one of the hardest cocktails that it took us to create. Pietro and I it was Pietro's idea to create a cocktail for our wine director, Thomas Pastuszek, for the birth of his first child, who for some reason called his son Walter Gibson, not even knowing that was the name of the guy that created the Gibson. So we wanted to create a cocktail based on Thomas's loves, which was, his favorite wine was Chenin Blanc, which, as we know, has a lot of orchard fruit to it, but also has a really waxy texture. And that was the hardest part to try to get right. So in combining all of these flavors, we were trying to get that orchard fruit flavor, which we did, but it was missing that texture. So we played with dilution, which didn't quite work for texture. And then the thing that we played with was aging or resting. So that's why we aged that cocktail in beeswax. So it picks up some of that like lanolin-like waxy texture, which sort of makes that cocktail. And if you taste that cocktail before it's rested and after, it's completely different. So I say explore, but I say also take fastidious notes and understand why you're doing things. And then sometimes when you create a cocktail and it's good, think about, is this good enough to be on a list? And what I mean by that is that no list should ever have a throwaway cocktail. You sort of get one shot. So is this what you want to be known for? Is this like what Dean Callan wants to be known for? And I think a lot of times as younger bartenders or mixologists or whatever you want to call us, people get really caught up in the cocktail they create and they become very myopic. And it's really hard for them to take a step back and say, is this crowd pleasing? As we all know, as bartenders, our palates are really fucked up. We like things that are very weird and that most people don't like. So it's take a step back and say like, okay, how should I adjust this for the everyday person to enjoy? But also don't be afraid if that cocktail is just not perfect to step away and throw it away and come back to it another time. Or don't be afraid of sometimes playing with aroma. Sometimes I just atomize certain ingredients over it. Like we have so many atomizers. I know Dean doesn't really like absinthe or a lot of licorice-like flavors.
Oh, right, yeah. I like hints of it. But I won't sit and drink a pastis. It gets to me.
What? You will not drink a pastis?
Do you want to know the real reason? Okay, when I first started bartending in a nightclub on the Gold Coast in Australia, and everyone just used to order Opal Nera Black Sambuca shots, and it drove me absolutely mad. The whole place stank of Black Sambuca. Like, okay? Like, if you know. But if you've been in a nightclub that has carpet on the floor and everyone's doing shots of Black Sambuca Opal Nera.
What was carpet on the floor?
In a nightclub. It was gross. I get the memory now. Like, anyway, so yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
well, don't be afraid to sort of play with a lot of the stronger aromas that may not have that flavor component, but may add something else. So like we use a lot of absinthe, we use a lot of mezcal, we use a lot of smoky scotch in atomizers to add a different layer of dimension to the cocktail, especially cocktails that are too pretty. A lot of times I try cocktails too crowd pleasing and I think of it as like a very attractive person. When they're so symmetrical, you're like, I just want to mess up their hair. I just want to change their nose. It's too pretty. I just want to funk it up some way. Because to me, it ends up making a cocktail more interesting because it adds more layer of depth or aroma or flavor.
And it also plays into the psychology of things. Like you said, people need to understand the classics and how they're made. And you also mentioned that when you train them, this is the original spec. So this is the original spec of the cocktail. So they know how to make it classic. And then they know how to make it your way. So they can then bridge. They know this is what people that come from Milk and Honey are expecting, and this is where we are. So if someone comes in and they say, I normally drink a Manhattan, or I normally drink, they can then apply the understanding of the flavor of the classic Manhattan and give them a recommendation that twists it just in the right direction for your flavor profile for your venue. Does that make sense?
100%.
For me,
I think
that psychology is big.
This was a huge thing for me coming to the UK. The UK, all of the spirits are way lower proof than they are in the US. So like Beefeater, I think it's like 40 or 42 in the UK when it used to be 47 in the US and now it's 45. So in our spec, I was like, why does this taste so bad? Like, why does it taste so watered down? So we had to change all of our specs for the UK. And a lot of people don't realize how much ABV has to do with cocktails. So I would say, like, really know the ingredients that you're playing with. Not only do you need to know the basic building blocks, you also need to understand the nuances in each category of spirit that you're using. So know that every gin is not the same gin. Know that every tequila is not the same tequila, and know that it's going to change the flavor of those cocktails significantly based on just the ABV alone, or just by the different aromatics or flavors that it has.
And
So
I
yeah,
think
don't be afraid to explore, but understand as well.
it's very important what you just said, because when I started bartending, what my school of bartending comes from actually American guests in Paris.
Yeah.
They will come and they will ask me for cocktails, and they will have the recipes. Like they will tell me the
Yeah.
recipes and like, I want this.
That's the
And
best
I
kind
will,
of guest.
and I will make it. And I will learn so much, because at that time I also have like very little education in Paris about cocktails. It was very limited, and I remember. I mean, I will never forget my first trade event, like my first one brand thing, was John Gakuru with Sagativo at the time doing caipirinhas. And when he explained that the caipirinha he was making and his recipe will never taste the same that if you are in Brazil, or it will because that's the other thing. People in Paris, for example, they
Yeah.
will comment that I want a mojito, and they expect the mojito they tasted in Latin America or in Cuba,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
so to connect with your guest on your cocktails and be able to modify your recipes to understand how to make them in a way that is a crowd pleaser. It's just that's the science. I mean, that became like the code to break.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I please a larger audience that believes that the best mojito, is the one they had in their holiday, and they want it in Paris when it's 3 degrees and it's
Yeah.
winter. But I would not even taste the same, even if I have the
I want
exact
that
same recipe.
mojito,
It's
I
just,
remember.
I'm sorry, I'm
Commonplace
not
is
taking you to
so
the beach
important.
with this mojito, but I can take you to the beach with something that will, that was what I always thought the old Cuban from Audrey Sanders was such a fantastic
Yeah.
recipe to propose, in colder months as a mojito alternative,
Mojito
because
Criollo
he had
variation.
he had the bitters, he had the champagne, it's up, like the whole
It
thing
is
was
an
just
amazing
served.
drink. Oh, I
It was
love that drink
served
so
so
much.
brilliantly, and I was able to please a crowd on a different season
Yeah.
with something that in their mind was made only one way. And that's how I think also people start trusting you as a bartender, and then you can start exploring flavors differently. Like that made so much sense to me
Yeah.
as a young bartender. It was how
Yeah,
can I
things
please
are really
you?
important. Like, one is like you understood that a lot of times time and place is really important for a cocktail. And the second is you weren't saying, "Oh, he likes a mojito. What is my favorite drink that's like a mojito?" You were saying, "What can I do to create this person's vision of a drink, but do it in sort of a different way for this time and place?" I think a lot of times younger bartenders get really excited about the drinks they like, that they don't really listen and understand what the guest is asking for,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Oh, mojito, I'm going to make you this drink," and you're like, no, like, making that drink, while it may have some ingredients like a mojito, you're adding like chartreuse and X, Y, and Z and something else. It doesn't taste anything like what this sort of person that likes a simple mojito is going to like.
Yeah, I
It's
think
that common question I get asked is like, and I think all of you probably do too, is like, what is your favorite drink?
oh right.
And
Yeah.
for me, it's so hard to answer. It's such a bullshit answer for most people. They get so mad at me. And I was like, well, where am I? And they're like,
Exactly.
"What do you mean?" I was like, "Because it changes. If I'm on the beach, I'm gonna drink as many pina coladas until I get a headache, and then I'm gonna switch to like tequila and coconut water. If it's snowing outside, I'm drinking something different. If I'm at Carina's bar, I'm gonna try every drink on her menu. Like, it's different. Like I drink everything.
It's so true. Myself on my honeymoon, myself and Electra, my wife, we started drinking like there were like blended mojitos in Cuba, and like
Oh, amazing.
they were in plastic cups by the side of the pool in the like insane heat. And we were drinking them as bits of mint all over the place and everything. And we were like, how is this? This is the best thing ever. How is this not more popular? And we just, like, there was a moment where we both looked at each other and were like, yeah.
It's not that great.
This isn't, we can't put this on a slushie at the Portobello Star. It's never going to work. You know, it's not going to work in London. And there's sometimes you get those great moments where you know that flavor, that moment is for that moment. And it becomes very special then because you can hold on to it. Now, speaking of holding on to things, Daniel Waddy from Satan's Whiskers. So you know Dan. I've been recording a few videos of him doing like very basic bartender technique chat. They take a couple of minutes. Do you want to stay tuned in, Leo, or do you need to go? Yeah?
Yeah, why not?
And this week he's discussing handling glassware and how to keep frosty glasses frosty and keep your fingers away from where the guests' lips are going to go.
Amazing.
Hi, my name's Dan, and we are back in Satan's Whiskers today to talk a little bit about how we handle glassware in the bar. Now, if I'm working in a nice wine bar and I'm picking up glassware like that, my manager's going to be on me about that pretty quickly. But sometimes I think the way that cocktail bartenders handle glasses, we're not necessarily paying as much attention, and it's quite common that I'm in a bar and I'm seeing people picking up a glass like that. And again, this should deserve the same care and attention. Now, if we're using stemware cocktail glass, pretty easy to know that we touch it by the stem to make sure that all of this is looking nice. Because if I'm touching around here, this sort of thing, I'm going to put fingerprints on it and defeats a lot of the point of having a pretty frozen glass. But also, if we're using something like a highball, again, my area is the bit at the bottom. Now, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it is perfectly easy with practice to avoid touching around the glass, touching it here, and putting my fingerprints all over that. Second point I want to note though, if you've got freezers, great for serving cold drinks, but also elevates the appearance of your product. But if you take the glass out of the freezer too early, then a lot of that is going to be lost by the time you give it to your guest. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to make 2 daiquiris. But for one of them, I'm going to take the glass out of the freezer before I start. And the second one I'll take out at the end. We can see that the glass that's come out straight away looks fresh, looks beautiful if someone wants to take a picture of that. The glass that I took out at the start looks sweaty. It's still a good drink, but we've kind of lost that initial impact of getting the glass quickly to our guest. So yeah, touch around the bottom, don't put your hand around the glass, and take frozen glassware out of the freezer as late as you can to maximise the impact when you serve it to your guests. Thank you.
All right, so that, honestly, handling glassware has to be the most basic thing on the planet. But it's also the most cringy thing when you're in a bar and you see someone construct beautiful cocktails and then they pick them up.
Yes.
And it's like, oh no.
I mean, it seems very obvious, but I would say it's probably the one thing that sometimes, because when you have a staff, like a new member of staff, etc., and let's say maybe they have a little experience of working somewhere, but if the basics of service have not been covered, that is the one thing you can see right away, how you grab your glass.
It's the first thing. It's really obvious.
And it's very upsetting. Well, you as a cocktail bartender, obviously, but even in general, like when you serve wine, I think wine is it's like shocking when, I mean, you ruin the temperature, you ruin the whole experience. Like you cannot just come from the top. And so it is an important thing to flag out and discuss for sure.
Yeah, do you think it's something that people cover? especially at the higher end of the bartending industry, like, you know, you would assume people would know.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the things that drives me a little bit crazy, and I love this series because Dan is just going absolutely back to basics, and that you could really see how particular he was about only touching the bottom.
Only touching the bar with 2 fingers, and so there is something that, I mean, I would say like in my own experience when I started bartending, we were in a high volume bar in the sense that you didn't need to be seated to have your cocktails; you could be standing.
Yeah.
At that time, we were not freezing our glasses. Yeah, like in Paris, you know, small venues, you crowd them as much as you can. And because it's also cultural, like when you go to a wine bar in Paris, like you're not expected to be seated. You're expected to, you're lucky if you're able to order your wine. Exactly.
Until you guys open, can anyone sit at a bar?
So the thing is, Candelaria, actually, at the beginning, we were on that format. We changed it. That was one of the good things that came to us, also having Chris in the team coming from London, but with COVID, where, you know, you needed to have the sit down only, and bars were not really open, but it was like a whole thing. But we learned basically to do table service in a much efficient and cleaner way. And now Candelaria is a sit-down bar. It's not what it used to be that we were happy with people standing. But yes, when we were Josh and I behind the bar, we knew how to grab glasses. But then when you were training younger bartenders to come behind the bar, etc., you would see that would be the biggest difficulty. And when you have a busy bar, people don't care. People just grab, like the clients themselves, just grab, you know, the cocktails or the glasses however they can. So I think the high volume, that what is genius about today, is that we have given so much importance to freezers. Like today, you don't realize, like when I opened Candelaria, I didn't had really freezing space. We changed all our back bar to have We changed our back bar to have freezers. Now we have more freezers than refrigerator. Yeah, because that is today not only the standards but the right way to do. Like we evolved to the better version of ourselves. That when at the back of the time we were cooling our glasses with crushed ice. You know, it's like a completely different world. But we talk also on a level of our network of cocktail bars, but when you think about the amount of bars in a city or in a neighborhood that don't have freezers, that don't freeze their glassware, and if you have staff there that are working there in the beginning of their career and then they come and work for you, if those things are not clear in your training program, etc., they get lost. So
I think a lot of times people don't train what they think is common sense, but what we don't realize is that this isn't common sense to a lot of people.
No, it's not.
So when somebody starts bartending or bar backing, they think, what do I need to do? I need to get things as fast as I can to the bartender. So they grab it in whatever way they can with as many glasses as they can, which is usually the claw technique, right?
Yeah.
Where you put all the fingers inside and pass it down. But that's because nobody has taught them to say, like, hey, we want you to be efficient, but we also want it to still be good for a guest. And it's funny because no matter how many bars you go to that in the world that could be really elevated bars, you see people doing that because nobody has ever taken the chance or the moment to teach them why, because it's not part of their training. They're like, I'm going to show you how to use a Rotovap, and I'm going to show you how to make all of our cocktails. But nobody thinks to say, like, how about I'm going to show you how to greet somebody when they walk in. I'm going to show you how to give a menu. I'm going to show you how we put our napkins down. I'm going to show you to meet somebody. I'm going to show you how to like handle glassware. I'm going to show you to give water. And like when we opened London, it was actually quite interesting because education or the style of training in London is very different than it is in New York. Not to say that one's better than other. It's just different.
You can't throw things at people in New York? I'm joking.
Sorry?
I said you can't throw things at people in New York.
No, you definitely can't. It's very true.
That's a more Parisian way of hospitality. Here, they're actually quite polite.
I say it because I've had something thrown at me a couple of times by people training me. So, but that was a long time ago.
No, but like most people in London, and I'm generalizing now, but most high-end bartenders in London that have worked in some of the most amazing places don't know how to make most classics. don't know a lot about spirits because it's not what they focused on, because they only serve the cocktails that they do on their menu, because these cocktails take so much time to produce that Satan's Whiskers is one of the few places you can walk into and order a whole bunch of classics.
It's
like most of the places, we serve what's on here. And I'm not saying that one's better than you do.
I think it'd be safe to say, you said 2006 when you were starting out in New York, you had the Sasha Petrowski, Dale DeGroff, that kind of, I don't want to say clique, but that kind of style of training, that I guess style. That's where I come from.
Me too.
Which are very classic driven, slight tweaks to classics, but very classics driven. Yeah. I'd say that Satan's Whiskers and the guys from Satan's Whiskers obviously worked at Milk and Honey in London and were trained by Dale, is one of those last, like, kind of, they're holding on to that exact style and only adapting it little bit by little bit for modern palates. And the style that you kind of were at the forefront of bringing in has now become kind of the norm in that top 1% of bars, where flavor forward rather than classic style. As someone who drinks in London all the time and loves classics, I literally had 20 of these shirts printed so that so I can justify ordering classics all the time.
Because everyone in London wants to know, what kind of bar is this? And I was like, and we do both. We do very classic cocktails that use a lot of fresh juices, because that's also not really a thing in London. And then we do some of these more technique forward, cocktails, because, why not? Like, it's more about the taste of the cocktail and what's better for the cocktail. But people get confused by both of them. They're like, wait, why? There's like, why not?
Well, I think it's about that time where you might have to... Yeah, it's been 45 minutes now, Leo. I think you might have given us
another meeting,
as much of your time as you can afford.
Nina's like, get out.
No. I'm very conscious. I'm very conscious that I don't want to hold you on.
I could stay talking here with you all day, but yeah, we're in a timing here.
It's one of those things. Like, I think 45 minutes disappears really quickly when you're actually sitting here speaking. Like, that's why some people do 3 or 4 hour podcasts, right? If we were all in the same room, we'd forget that the cameras are on after a while and just start having a conversation.
Keep talking. Yeah.
But you realize when you come out of it that, like, oh my God, I was meant to be in a meeting 15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
But I think if there's any more questions from the group chat, and I see, Leo, you answering questions while you're doing this. You're a master of multitasking. Like, Leo popping up and answering the questions in actual text while he's here is just next level. It's level 2.
I know.
Like I said, when I first met you, I was like, that's the guy. That's level 2. This is the next level, okay? I know where I am now. Cool. Leo, I want to say thank you so much for coming on board. And
thank you, Leo.
And being on our little podcast. And
hopefully see you very soon. And thank you for all these incredible insights and inspiring story.
It was amazing. Thank
sorry
you
so much, but love you all.
I hope to see you in April. Ciao.
Ciao.
Yeah.
And that'll be it. I think we'll wrap it up for another week. And hopefully see you next week.
I actually think you have another guest next week.
I know.
But yes, everybody else.
Yeah.
See you next week.
Ciao, guys.
Bye.
Take care.